ahead and get started. So, for those of you who haven't been around before, it's okay, don't worry about it. You'll be, well, I mean, hopefully you'll be able to follow along, but, you know, you don't have to have watched all the other programming videos to be able to keep up with this. Usually the programming goes for an hour to 2 hours, depending, like, find sort of a natural cut point, and then we'll be switching over to Dwarf Fortress. So we're working on something called Project Caprica, which is a 4X space strategy game. It is, in a very real way, going to be a clone of, like, a Master of Orion, for example, is what we're using as sort of the general template for our inspiration for stuff. We've done a lot of, like, little UI work. I mean, it's still, you know, on the ugly side, but that's fine. We can click on these various star systems. We've got planets that show up, and that's about it. We can't click on the planets for any more information currently. But we've got you know, some generic stuff in there, and actually what's happening in the background is a lot of galactic information is being created in the background. We've done a lot of code to get the galaxy generation, the star system generation, and so on and so forth getting started. We've also done a lot of work with the user interface, and I thought today that maybe we could work on like fleets that are in systems, and we sort of like can jump it from system to system. But I thought, you know what, we last time we did a stream, it was all user interface stuff, and so I think what I'd like to do is go back and look at stuff a little bit more code-centric. And there's a couple of things that I think would be a great thing for us to approach right now. In particular, getting in the logic for the players, which is something that we don't have right now. And maybe it would make sense to do that first before we start working on fleets, because maybe you want to be able to differentiate between, you know, who owns which fleet and things like that. Currently, we don't have classes or objects or anything like that to represent player. The only reference really that we've got in it is in our code when we create our galaxy here. We have this one reference to number of players, which we don't use anywhere currently. We do use number of stars and galaxy width, and that's it. Now, one of the things that we've got here, we wrote this little galaxy config little sort of class just to centralize some of our info. We did that quite early on, with the caveat that we knew this was going to change, but I knew that this info had to exist somewhere. There had to be some sort of reference to the galaxy config, because when you go through the new game screen, you set up, oh, I want this many players, this many stars, whatever. That had to sort of be saved somewhere so that the galaxy generation system could reference it. I just did this little public static class. In a sense, these are like global variables, right? But they're still scoped, and they're still, you know, it's just even calling it class is maybe a little inaccurate, because it's almost just like a little public struct that you can easily reference data. And then the fact that it isn't sort of this class or whatever, then you can go and create sort of like permissions and encapsulations and things like that as needed. But the interface was going to stay unchanged. That being said, since then we did go and create this generic sort of config class, which right now is just this like silly sort of switch case system. The idea is this is going to instead be replaced with something that reads in from a configuration file. But the important thing, again, is that the user interface is going to be the same. And we use this all over. We can go anywhere in our code, config.getInt, and then we pass it the string of the parameter that we're looking for, and it returns data. And right now, again, they're sort of hard-coded in here, but the idea is instead of just this switch statement, we're going to be looking things up in this configurable text file later on. But we won't have to rewrite any of the other code. And having this centralized config system makes a lot of sense. Even if you're writing a sort of an application, the idea that there's some sort of like a config file and a global way that your various functions, you don't want to write, you know, let's say we're writing code somewhere, you know, or in our gun battle scene, right? And we want to know, oh, how much damage is a medium laser supposed to do? You don't want that code to have to read your text file and figure it out or whatever. No, you just want to call some sort of generic config class and just say, what is the medium laser damage? And the config class is supposed to take care of all that for you. So the implementation is very rough right now, but the function is exactly what we want. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to move this, because I think we wrote this first. We're going to go ahead and just move these parameters over to the other thing, because it makes sense to have it all over there. So we're going to create a few more little cases here. What are they going to be called? So num players. So something like this. Now one thing, okay, hold on. Maybe there's a slight difference between what the galaxy config and what this config is supposed to be. Because this config file sort of represents static values, like values that aren't supposed to change, other than in a text file, right? Like what's the population size what's the normal population maximum of a medium planet? That doesn't really change on the fly. But the number of current players in the game, again, doesn't change on the fly exactly while you're playing a game, but it does change in the app because from your new game menu, you are deciding how many players are going to be in there. So does the config system get some sort of ability, like are we going to have a set int? To me, that's not really what config is supposed to be. Although, is config also going to store information like what resolution people have stored, like chosen and things like that? In which case, we do want a way to set it. I hadn't really thought about it that way. Oh, the shirts are cotton. Oh, that's good. Excellent. So you see what I'm thinking? And this is like, programming is all full of these little questions. The thing is, there's no reason we can't do this, right? It's easy to write a little set in, like, and we can have these things stored in variables and whatever. But should we? I'm just gonna hold off for now. The idea, we're gonna have the idea, for now, this may change. For now, the idea of this config class is to be an index of values that don't change at runtime. So, i.e., things like galaxy settings from the new game screen won't be saved here. This may change. But again, if we're talking about something that loads from a config file, that's it. Now, what we can imagine is in here we might have values that get used by the new game screen. Like, what are the options for galaxy size? What are the options for number of players? That sort of thing. You know, okay, number of players from 4 to 8. Those are your range. So you might put that in as part of the config file over here. But so that'll be that. Again, these things may all change, but that's going to be okay. So the galaxy config, again, right now is a public integer. Again, we may decide to encapsulate it, but the interface is basically the same, so that can change from the new game screen. All right, fair enough. So what I want to do now is I want to create the player class. Using enums for things, I don't think makes a sense for this because, again, we're going to be loading in from a text file. We don't want to have to recompile if these numbers are changed, right? It means it's easier to make changes for ourselves or for designers to make change, but also it makes it more moddable. So using enums for this doesn't make any sense. I'm going to suggest, right? Some things do, some things don't. We already have some enums in here somewhere. Okay. Right, player class. Right, so because we create this galaxy, and that's fine. But what we're gonna want is some ability to like process each player's turn. Now, for a human player, processing the turn means just sitting around and waiting until they hit the end turn button, right? Because they're going to do stuff. But for the AI, that's when they're going to actually be crunching some numbers. But players also need information, like how many energy credits or BCs, I guess they tend to be referred to as BCs in Master of Orion, right? How much money does the player have? What technologies have they unlocked? We also need a reference to player so that any colonies that are created will point to their owning player, and vice versa. We might want to have some sort of list in the player object that holds a reference to all of their colonies, all of their fleets, da-da-da-da-da. Clearly we need somewhere to store player information. I think this should belong to Galaxy. We have this universe manager, which holds the galaxy, but I think really the galaxy is a data object, right? The universe manager is really, it's a mono behavior. If we sort of follow our model view controller sort of architecture, the universe manager is one of these controllers. It's not meant to store data. The galaxy object is what holds all of our data. And the idea is, the way we're sort of structuring this is when we save the game, we're basically saving the galaxy. We're taking the galaxy and saving it, and when we reload it, we tell the galaxy to load from a config file. So the galaxy is going to hold on to our players. So we're going to have, probably just like we have a list of star systems, we're probably going to have some sort of private list of players. like this. My capitalization is actually off for something that's private. Same thing here. This should be probably lowercase like this if we're being kind of a little bit more consistent. So we don't currently have a player class, so let's make one. Remember, you didn't create the universe in one day. Ha! I meant instead of a getInt method. Hang on. You're in danger. Oh, use enums instead of using. But again, we can't use enums instead of getInt because we have to load from a config file. I mean, we could use enums instead of a string. We did have a discussion about that, whether the parameters should be enums or strings. We may change this. The nice thing about if we do use enums, then you can get a compile time check. And that may be something that changes. So yeah, instead of a string parameter, we might have an enum parameter. And I'm sure that we will be taking a look at that. But yeah, we're just going to move on for now. The problem is, like, this is really easy because we can just keep defining things on the fly. And one of the other things is later on, we don't necessarily need to have a list of these things. We just look for it in a config file, and in our code, we can have it. And I don't know. Well, let's save that. We've had a discussion about it before, and we will have a discussion about it again, but we're going to be doing something else right now. We got to move on. So we're going to create a player class. So in our data over here, I will add a new item. This like annoys me. Like, just make a generic C# class. Like, it doesn't, but it wants to do like mono behavior or this or that. Whatever, it doesn't matter. So we're going to call this script player. It's not going to be a mono behavior. This is going to be a plain old data class. That's going to be fine. We're going to strip this down, and we're going to make sure that it's in the Caprica namespace. So the namespace is just a way to organize your code so that you have a unique space for your names, is really what this means. So that way, if you have some other piece of code that has a class named player, well, this is Caprica player, as opposed to whatever else player, so they don't step on each other. Now, in game development, we have come to the realization that extensive subclassing is really not the route to success. We have learned that a component system, and this is a lesson that people have been learning and relearning for like 30 years now. It doesn't only apply to game development, all sorts of application stuff and everything it applies, but it really, really works in game development. It turns out that a component approach is much more useful and much more powerful than a class-based approach, or a subclassing-based approach. That being said, I think the player class is going to be a great example for subclassing, in that the generic player class will hold everything that all players, or all empires, I suppose we could have called it empire instead of player, right? Will, all their data that they need to have to run. But then I think there will be a subclass for a sort of player underscore human versus player underscore AI, and theoretically in the future player underscore like remote multiplayer kind of person or something like that. And the only difference will be is there's going to be some sort of like abstract, probably public abstract do turn function or something like this that, I don't know, might return a void, and of course doesn't have any sort of data over here. Did I? Oh, public abstract class. There you go. So the idea is you can't actually make an instance of the player class itself. You're either going to have to make player underscore human or player underscore AI. And those classes will have to implement do turn. Or do turn process or whatever. The idea is this is going to be called every frame. And for the player, the human player version of it, do turn's really not going to do anything. It's because really all we're waiting for is UI things, so it might just return immediately and not really do anything. But for the AI, do turn will start processing AI things. And what we'll want to do is design the AI's do turn function so that it doesn't like hang the system or the user interface, right? So we'll use coroutines or multi-threading or something like that so that the UI is still responsive while the AI is, thinking through all of its moves and things like that. So that'll be that. Anyway, so there'll be some sort of thing like this. And then in terms of data that this class will actually have, I mean, So yeah, do we have a bunch of lists? Let's have connect.generic in here. So, because all the star systems belong in Galaxy, right? But the player, we might want to have a quick reference for all the players owned. Well, players don't own star systems, players own colonies. So we could have some sort of list of colony and then call it just, colonies or something like this. Now, one of the things we keep sort of putting off is some sort of conversation about how we're actually going to reference these things back and forth, because one of the things in code, it's really convenient to work with these lists, okay? It's really handy to have these list of colonies because then you just reference things. So the problem comes, how do you save and then reload these various lists? Because you can't just save a list. Like, a list is some sort of entity in memory, right? Especially if you think about it as an array. Just an array is just an array of pointers to other things in RAM. Well, when you're saving to a file, you can't just save pointers. So do we actually, instead of having a list of colonies, is it something like a list of integers, which is their colony IDs? And I don't remember if we've had a full discussion about how we're going to organize this. Because what's nice about this is then you can just save this list of numbers. Now, it may not matter at all for serialization on this side. Because really, if you think about it, when we go and save the galaxy, like save the galaxy to a file, is the block of like player data, right? The player data is going to have, some sort of, I don't know, some sort of race value. We'll just have it be an integer, but, so it's our race, how much money we have, those sorts of things. Like, yeah, so in the save file, in the area where we're saving the player information, we'll probably save what race they are and how much money they have. But do we actually have to save the list of colonies there? And I would suggest that the answer is probably no. Instead, what's probably the case is when we're going to be saving in the save file, there'll be the area where we actually save the colonies themselves, and probably the colonies are going to have a reference to their player. So as long as the players maybe have a numeric ID, that might be enough. Although we'll also need some sort of like numeric way to reference the planets. Or I guess serialization's pretty fancy. It can just do some link stuff, especially if we like, XMLs and different formats like that. So the planets can reference this. But yeah, the reference to the player, because I don't think it's going to be nested the same way, I don't think it can open that up. So I think probably the players will have an ID. Reverse it, colonies of player IDs. There we go, broke stream, exactly what I'm talking about. And I think that's the way it's going to be. So, but I don't know if anything else needs a numeric ID. I mean, planets maybe. We do actually have, see, we have this planet index system in here. And I think that's probably what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that everything in the game has an index, a numerical index that can be referenced that way. And depending on where we're saving data, like, it's probably easier for us to have a pointer to the colonies here, but it's almost as easy for the player to only just have a list of IDs in here. So there's one extra level of indirection. Like, we'll need a function call to look up and get an actual, like, reference to the actual colony starting with a number. But it's not that slow, depending on how we do it. I think you should make a player ID and a colony ID. I think so. I think just like how we have it for planets over here. Now, we were just spitballing. Again, we don't know exactly what format this will take. But the idea, and it's like there's not even a constructor here to set this planet index right now, right? We're just sort of spitballing some ideas about organization. I'm not even sure, like these enums that we're using over here for the planet types, I'm not even sure if that's the right way to do it. Again, we might want to define all these values in a text configuration file. So then the planet type, like, might just be a numeric ID or a string or something like that, depending on exactly how we organize it. But yeah, I think we're going to end up doing something like this. And I like using the word index as opposed to ID because it makes it very clear that this is a zero indexed array, right? Because if you just have like an ID, you might have the sense that, well, like the first ID might be 1. Now in programming, usually, you you start counting from 0 because of things. I like using the word index because it makes it explicit, like, right, this is an index in an array, so the first thing will be a 0. And that specifically, like, the ID, the ID is not arbitrary, right? Like, we could use some sort of, like, global unique ID generator so that you get something like string planet ID is equal to da-da-da-da-da dash ba 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 dash whatever. I mean, that's a valid, unique ID that we could use to reference things, and then we could use dictionaries or something like that. But I like using the word index to, like, really remind us of what the heck this thing represents. So we'll probably end up with something similar, and so that I don't forget this sort of thing, we'll do some sort of colony index. And then, yeah, for planet, well, in code here, having the planet be, just an actual reference to the planet object is fine. When we serialize and deserialize this, depending on exactly how we save this data, when we save the colony, what we might do is insert a reference to the planet ID in the text file, or not the text file, whatever the save file format is, so that when we load, we just know we can reference that, and then we just make a request to the Galaxy, hey, Galaxy, please return to me. Yeah, because we can get a star system with ID, but we could put in some sort of request for a planet ID as well. Although if we do that, we do need a reference to all planets in here or something like that, so that there's one centralized place for all planets to have an ID. Because right now, there's no, like, we have a reference to, well, these planet IDs, or these planet indexes, but there's no single array with all the planets. Probably there should be. So what we'll do is we'll plan on that, right? We've got a single list here with all the star systems. We're going to do the same thing with... How come... There we go. Planet, planets, colony, colonies. And then it might be some other things for, like, fleets or whatever. And this is good because if ever, if the game needs to process an effect that needs to cycle through every colony in the game, regardless of which player owns it, then we've got a nice centralized list for it. And this is also how we're going to refer to things based on their IDs. We're going to use this sort of system for it. So I think that's the sort of thing we're going to do. Okay, so that means that players in here will have, just like with planets and colonies and all that now, is we are going to have this public read-only planet index. And clearly when we construct this, now abstract classes can have constructors, right? They're just going to have to be called by the other thing. Sure. Public player. And at the very least, we're going to have to pass it our planet index. I think this is okay. And then we can set a read-only value. And these are things in C# that I don't actually do a lot. But I want to get, like, better and more used to doing these things. At least you can set a read-only value in a constructor, and that's the only place you're allowed to set it. I think read-only values are not actually enforced at runtimes. There are sneaky ways that you can, like, change these or whatever. It's mostly compile time things, but it's mostly okay. No, so read-only is not the same as a constant. You can make a constant in here. The idea with read-only is it's basically a set once, set in a constructor, and I think that's it. And C# list is implemented as an array list, 01, random access. Yeah, the as far as I know, like, if you've ever written code for a class that has, like, a resizable array in it, right? Whenever you hit the array max and you make a new array that's maybe 50% larger and copy everything over, that's, I think, how the list is implemented internally. You can actually access all those files. So list is very fast, and it is sequential. So what other information might a player have? Like, we don't know what a race is. Like, to do, become racist. We don't know how these are going to be configured or saved or anything like that. If we take the Master of Orion route, I mean, there's the ability to make custom races. So basically what there's going to be some sort of race class, where we can fill in with like, oh, this race has +2 food and whatever, and also some sort of system for reading a template. Like if you're playing as the klaxon or whatever, it just loads the text file version of the klaxon into this runtime thing, but all those numbers could be changed on the fly or whatever. I guess there's some sort of concept of like unlocked technologies. Right? Which one could imagine, probably what we'll have is actually a class to manage this. Unlocked technologies. Technologies. Is that how you spell it? You know, sometimes you like write a word and it's like, that doesn't look right. Something like this. And I could see, rather than sort of like manually working with these things, although it's hardly the end of the world, I could see us maybe having some sort of like class to represent unlocked technologies. And that's a good point. Maybe the planet index doesn't need to know its own, but we'll do this. Like we'll just assume that every object internally is aware of its own ID in case we need to reference it somewhere. Probably it's not a big deal, but what the heck, right? It's fine. But they'll refer to other things as just like links to or like references to each other at runtime. That's going to be okay. So maybe we don't need this at all, but maybe for debugging purposes, right? We want to be able to, like, imagine that as part of our just some of our debug.log outputs, or some sort of like we go into a debug mode where in the user interface we can mouse over things. We might want to have things report their own IDs. You see this in Paradox games and things, for example, where like, all provinces and all whatevers have like a numeric ID that you can see in a debug thing. And then you can also refer to that in a save file, so you can see if things are loading and unloading properly. So it might be handy. I don't think it'll get used much at runtime, but I think it's okay. Yeah, and Brookstream, you may be right about like, I think we're gonna want a list, because we're going to be iterating over a list of our own colonies quite frequently, right? It's going to be a very, 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 very common thing for us to have some sort of like code where we're going to do some sort of for each colony C in colonies. So we're going to want to keep track of all the colonies owned by a player at runtime to make this more optimal, rather than doing something like, for each colony C in all galactic colonies, in all galaxy dot colonies, however we're going to write this code, right? And then if C equals mine, do some stuff. This would be less convenient and less quick. So, you keep a little reference to that. So this is not necessary, but we're going to want it. You know what I mean? Like, there's other ways to get the info, but we're going to want this. We do have to make sure to update both the master array of all colonies as well as the ones that the player owns, and not forget to do that, but I think it's going to be very good for us. Should initialize that list. I mean, yeah, I guess so. That's true. We'll do that, but right now, like, we're not necessarily looking to do this stuff. We're sort of just eyeballing, okay, what kind of data might we need? So that brings me to the idea of, okay, let's talk about technologies and what the deal is there. Now, one thing here, you'll notice I'm not thinking about having reference to technology, because I'm going to assume, let's go and add a new item called, I don't know, technology. There. And so the idea is this is going to be some sort of technology that can be unlocked. And probably what's going to happen is some sort of, like, the technology is going to do something. And I think this is going to be a great place for us to put in kind of like anonymous functions, like Lambda functions and things like that, which we've used before. For when you enable the technology, a thing happens. Depending on how the code works, like, let's say there's a technology that is something like, when you unlock this technology, all your farms produce +1 food. How do we want that to be represented in the game? Right? And there's a lot of ways to keep track of it, like, because some technologies unlock a new building type. Some technologies unlock maybe a new part that you can use for ships, or even a new ship class. Some technologies just give you some sort of numeric bonus to something else. How do we want to monitor this? Like, what we could do is keep track of unlocked technologies. We could have things checked, like every time you load up a building screen. Like, let's say you're in a colony, right? And let's say we have some sort of function here that is, we'll just use void just so that I can type things, but it's really something like get list of valid buildings, right? Return an array of all buildings that can be built on this planet. So the question is, does this do something like for each building in our master building list, look up if the player has unlocked the corresponding technology? Method 1. And this is a perfectly valid way of doing it. But another way might be something like method 2. Whenever technology is unlocked that enables a building, then that building is added to the list of legal buildings for that player. Very much like the idea of this list of colonies for the player, the second system requires a little bit of bookkeeping, right? So when a technology gets unlocked, we have to update this list of legal buildings that belongs to this particular player. The advantage of it is it's much faster. We don't have to do a big lookup. So method 1, basically every time we open a colony, we have to rebuild this sort of master building list. Whereas with method 2, we just have the list of legal buildings for that player, and the only thing we have to do in either case, filter out buildings already built here, assuming buildings are unique, which in something like Master Ryan they are. So both of these are going to be perfectly valid approaches, and both of them have conveniences and both of them have annoyances. I'm kind of tempted towards method number 2. The one sort of got you at this is that when we load a game, what we're basically going to have to do is, so each technology will have some sort of function that is going to be something like unlock technology. Maybe just unlock. So this is going to have some sort of thing like this will modify the player bonuses, i.e. Food bonus plus equals 2 or something like that, or add a building to the list of legal buildings for colonies, etc. One thing we'll have to do is when you load a game is you'll have to like pull up the list of all the technologies the player has unlocked and run this unlock function so that it brings everything up to date. The plus side of doing it this way, as opposed to just like, so in this case what we wouldn't do is we wouldn't save all these food bonuses. We wouldn't save the list of unlocked buildings, right? All we do is save the list of unlocked technologies and run this sort of function again, however form this may take when we load a file. The upshot of it is if, for example, if a patch has come out and the technology has changed and you know the food bonus went from +2 to +3, then when you reload the game, it's going to give you the +3 food bonus instead of the +2. Sometimes this sort of thing can backfire on us, but it's one of those pros and cons. Like each approach has advantages, each approach has disadvantages. I think we're going to go with this. See, but caching is basically what we're doing. We're just caching it in a different place, Broke. We're caching it when the change happens, rather than rather than invalidating a cache and then regenerating it at a time. And the plus side to this is there's only one place. There's one piece of code that's going to make all the changes regarding to a technology. The other way, what has to happen, see, what I like about this is the technology class / whatever is responsible for any changes to like the player / colony / whatever that occurs as a result of technologies. The other way around is all the code regarding to colonies, all the code regarding to planet bonuses or player bonuses and things like this have to be aware of what the technologies are and look them up. Like, so we have to do something, like for the player in particular, right? Like, let's say, you know, the colony, it's time for the colony to like produce food, right? We've got some sort of like public void do turn production. Right? When you hit like end turn or in between turns, we're going to produce some stuff. And then as a part of this is like, okay, so now we're going to produce food. Right? What do we want? Do we want some sort of system where we say, okay, well, first get like the base race food, so like, you know, food amount. So first we go to the player.race.base food. And then we say something like, okay, now look up any texts that might affect food. Now, one way might require us to know this. The other thing might require us to have, okay, for all technologies, any technology might be able to like change food production, change minerals, you know, and specifically like change science for a basic research lab. And some games will do this. They're basically just a giant spreadsheet where all technologies just have these like entries over here, and they make those modifications. And then in other pieces of code, and I've seen plenty of games that do this. And so now it's something like, okay, for each technology, for each tech key, oh, there we go, autocomplete, in all techs unlocked, all techs, then first, like, is this tech unlocked by this player? Then, okay, then you do something like food amount plus equal key dot whatever, food bonus or whatever we'd called it, you know, something like this. I've seen tons of stuff that do this. And it's not all bad. There's advantages to doing this way, but it requires a lot of like knowledge here as to what the technology system does. What I'm trying to get to is the idea that players and colonies and everything like that, 100% tech agnostic. They have no idea what the technologies are supposed to do. Instead, the technology system is responsible for just handling all that for us. And I think it's going to lead to much, 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 much cleaner code. And also something super moddable, because the idea is this technology's like unlock behavior is going to be run Lua code from highly moddable files. That's what we're going to do. And it's going to be gorgeous. Boom. So instead what we have here is some sort of thing, like the race is going to have some sort of like base food production for the race. Like most races in Moo, I think is like 2 food per person. But depending on your racial pick, you might do slightly more or less. But then in addition to that, we probably have over here some sort of just like int bonus food production, you know, which starts at 0, and technology will just change this on the fly. Could also be temporary effects, which might be a different thing, but in fact, temporary effects will probably work just like technology, right? If we have some sort of, well, I won't do it now, but it'll be basically a temporary effect will have one function for when this goes into effect, and one when it stops going into effect, which will be sweet. All right. Yeah, I think we've done we did something fairly similar to this in Project Porcupine with regard to technology, and it tends to lead to much more sort of encapsulated code. But again, it's not the only way of doing it, and there's huge amounts of pros and cons for both ways. Okay. Right, so player stuff. So these Booleans, I don't know how we're going to manage the text. One of the things that's interesting about Master of Orion, if you haven't played it before, again, and most of my experience with Master of Orion 2 in particular, is there are 8 tech categories, and each tech category has a linear progression. Like, so there's like a fields category, which is mostly responsible for shields and also like Gauss weapons and things like that, magnetic field weapons. So there's the level 1, the level 2, the level 3, and all of those. But at each level, there's a choice of multiple different technologies. And you unlock one of them, and that's it. You have to choose one of those, and you don't get the others unless you trade for them, or if you're creative, then you get all of them. But that's a whole other thing, right? The player doesn't need, at this juncture right over here, the player doesn't really need to be aware of that. Do they need to keep a track of their unlocked technology? That is all. I suppose the only reason if we're implementing our system like this, then the only reason we need to keep track of what technologies we've unlocked is simply for the purpose of saving and reloading things. And that's about it. We can deal with like the user interface representation. We might want some sort of like what tech level we've unlocked as well, although we can figure that out at from this information. We can derive it from this whenever we figure out how we're actually going to structure our technology system. I'm sure there'll be a little bit more bookkeeping, but we're gonna keep this aside for now. This is like so not how we're going to do it. Just because this is going to be insufficient, so we'll figure out some other damn thing. I don't know. Really is kind of breaking through my green screen. Yeah. Okay, let me move something. They had a shadow for a while, and I think it's been ever since something got nudged. Oh, also my shirt is a little bit green screeny, but we don't have that little shadow anymore. That's better, right? Exactly. Programming is like cooking in many ways, even basic things. Yeah. And it's good to have the discussions. Although at some point, I always say with programming, it's like you just have to freaking do it. You can always change things later, especially if you've written things in a certain way, you can rip a whole section out and replace it without breaking everything. And that's hopefully what we're going to go for over here. Okay, so we've got this like sort of concept of players, and then there's going to be the player subclasses. I'll move them to a separate file later, but for now, I'm just so that the classes kind of exist. And here's another thing with like nomenclature for derived classes. I'm gonna go and do this. Just because, public class, right. So we're getting an error because it doesn't implement the abstract member do turn, because it has to. So we have to have a public override. This is something, as someone who came from like the C++ world, the fact that I have to write the word like override is still a little like, oh, it doesn't just do it automatically? Interesting. But I guess it does remind you that it's doing something from the subclass. So we actually have to implement do turn. And then we're going to have some sort of there's no argument given that corresponds to required. Oh, right. Remind me, in C#, how do we call, is it super or base? Super is Java, right? And can you do it in C#? Can you do the thing where you call it here, or am I just thinking of a C++ thing? That's the problem with, like, mostly learning more programming languages is easy. Fudge! Mostly, like, once you know a couple programming languages, you can keep swapping. It's little things like this, though, that I'm like, wait. Oh, just base? No. No. Oh! Thank you. And I still have to pass planet index, right? There we go, thank you. Now, here we can do something like base and then call whatever, and it just calls the one from the parent class, but it's different with the constructor. Okay. Like, hold on, I'm almost there. We've almost got this. And then, let me just copy this. Player-AI. Boom, boom. So, do the various AI calcs. Do not freeze up the UI. Either use coroutines, either explicit coroutines, or we just return from time to time, or a thread to do calcs and return from do turn quickly / frequently. We'll figure out some sort of thing with this. Now, one of the questions is, how do we let the universe manager, because the universe manager over here, so it's got update, but probably what it's got is some sort of, I don't know, one can imagine something like player, a current player, and then we're doing something like current player dot do turn, right? On each update, we're letting the player know, like, do stuff. Now, this is not, notice that it's not necessarily taking the entire turn. We're running this every single frame. We're doing this to, like, keep sending a heartbeat. For a human player, it doesn't matter. For an AI, we're letting it know every frame, like, okay, do some more work. If this is if we're doing some sort of co-routine-y kind of thing, in some fashion, we'll figure out exactly how this is going to run later on. We're telling it, okay, go ahead and do some more work. Hopefully not too much, because we want to be able to return. We want to keep a good frame rate so that things are responsive, so that we can keep playing music, although sound is handled by a second thread already, so it's kind of okay. Maybe it's not the end of the world if the UI freezes for, like, 10 frames, because you might not even notice it or whatever. We don't know how this is going to be run later on. We're not sure. But we got to keep prompting it, like, okay, you can do a little bit of work now, hopefully not too much. And for the AI thing, like, if we do things with coroutines, then it might be, doing coroutine-y kind of things. Or if it's even a thread, we might just be checking, like, is this thread still running? Yes, no, maybe so. Is the thread for, like, that's calculating colony work, like what building should I build on these various planets? Is that thread done running, but now we want to start up a thread to move the ships around? Like, we don't know what format it's going to be, but it can babysit those things and just make sure the appropriate ones are running. But at some point, we have to ask ourselves the question, how do we let the universe manager know that this player is done? Halting problems. How do we let the universe manager, this player is done, and we can move on to the next player? So sometimes what we do is we have, like, do turn return maybe like true or false, right? Returns, again, it's arbitrary. It returns true if it's done and false if it's not, or maybe it returns true if it still has more work to do, false otherwise. So we could go either way, but I think what I'm going to do here instead is I might just have, like, some sort of flag to let the game know that, like, okay, we're done. That's another way of doing things, right? And then we just check that, basically. So while player, like, is done, if player is not done, then we keep going or something like that. Either way is fine. I guess there's no reason to add an extra, like, Boolean variable to our class. So really what we want is, instead of this being a void, we have it be a Boolean. I think that's probably fair. And I think it returns true if it's not done. Like, true if we're still doing our turn. Does this have the... Yeah. returns true if still working on the turn, false if done. Now for the human player, what we are going to have is we are going to need a Boolean here. That's why I was thinking like we might have a Boolean even for the AI, because what we have is some sort of end turn button clicked is false or something like that. And then, so when we click on the end turn button in the user interface, it sets this to true. And really what this is, and what this is doing is returning, I guess it's returning the inverse of this. If we're saying true means more processing is required, right? So for the AI, again, it's like, if we are still running coroutines / threads, return true. Otherwise, we return false over here. Right, so we've got that. But I mean, that's why I was thinking, well, if we already need some sort of Boolean here to flag this, do we just want some sort of like Boolean in the base class? And so this just sets it and we check that. I don't know. And then, yeah, when do we reset the Boolean? I guess for this, it'd actually be something more like if end turn button was clicked, we are done. So we do something like return false. And what we do is we just set this to false for the next loop. And then otherwise what we do is we return true. If we get here, we're not done taking our turn, so ask for more time. Right? Something like that. And it works. I mean, that's fine. And then we just need some way to set this. Either we make this public, or maybe we have a public function to call it, or different things, or we make it a property, or whatever. We'll figure out how we talk to the user interface when we want to wire up that button, which could be now, I guess. Bum 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 bum. Yeah, and that's one of the things. We could have a start turn function to reset the flag, but I think this is probably a fine way to do it. We just reset it here, right? If it's been doing this, then we reset it to false, and we return false. Done, done, done. And yeah, I think, like, we probably, I would think, have some sort of public button, have some sort of button for that. One of the questions will be, how does our user interface know which one our human player is? Well, I guess we set that when we create everything, because there's only, I mean, hot seat aside, there's only one human player. Or rather, at any given time, there's one human player that is like the user interface master. If you have some sort of hot seat setup, then all that happens is when one human ends their turn, the current human interface master pointer just gets changed. So probably we do something like public void end turn. Yeah, we probably just do something like end turn button click equals true. And then over maybe in universe manager, like we have current player for this, you know, player taking their turn could be AI. But then we'll also have something like human player. The player that the UI represents could change in a hot seat game. If we've got something like that. And we want to be able to get this. And then you get the whole, is it a property, is it this or that, whatever. There might be different reasons for it. But like the user interface will need to know who the current human player is. So I'm going to suggest we just do this. I mean, maybe we go ahead and we do like get protected set or something like that. So the UI can't necessarily change who the current human player is if we need to for some reason. Well, you know, we can change this a million times. We're just spitballing still. So now the UI has some sort of way to access like who the human player is. Maybe we rename this. Maybe it's not human player. Maybe it's like UI player or controlling player. You can name it a million different ways. Because in a way, you could do something weird like have an observer mode, right? Where the AI is playing by itself and you can choose which AI you're like viewing the user interface from. It would be as easy as just pointing this to something else. We'll call it human player is fine. The active player isn't exactly right either because current player is the one who's taking their current turn. I mean, maybe active player is fine. Controlling player might be okay too. Yes, I'm standing up. I got a standing desk. Lovely. We'll just keep it with this for now, but you guys can see the arguments. So if we switch back over to Unity and actually consider doing a little tiny bit of actual user interface work. Again, last time we did this, we did a ton of UI work, so I was hoping to just, sit back a little bit. If we go to the UI and the end turn button, hover here, it's got a button script. So we're going to do something like, probably we want to be able to get a hold of this, because I'm sure the user interface is definitely going to have to be like, hey, listen, which player object am I reading? Because we've got a toolbar at the top, right, that shows our current money and energy or whatever the heck we're going to be representing at the top of the screen, right? And this is going to have to be read from a player, which is the human player or the controlling player. Maybe we'll just call it human player. It's fine. It's fine. Quill, move on. And so it's going to need to be able to grab that easily. But in this case, with the end turn button, we sort of kinda don't need a reference to the human player, because I was going to say we could have a sort of public button, like a public here in the universe manager, but the universe manager shouldn't care about this shit. Yeah, okay. Because what I was going to try to do is avoid writing a script for the end turn button, but I don't think that's going to happen. So we will go ahead and write a script for, and my UI code, I like to usually preface with UI, just because it makes it really clear that it's just random UI script that's not very important. I tend to put them in a different folder as well, but UI end turn bouton, undo that. And this is going to do something very simple. We're just going to have public void button clicked. Now we could use the Unity UI stuff to implement an interface and have it automatically do things, and maybe that would be better. I don't know, but do we have? I assume we have Galaxy instance or some sort of mechanic for that. No, it's not static. Because we want to be able to find the universe manager really easily from the UI. So I think we're very, very, very much going to have to get... Yeah, see? This question mark. Maybe also get callbacks from the end turn button. I don't think I want the Galaxy manager to get callbacks from the end turn button. The end turn button is simply going to query who the human player is, and then tell the human player, hey, your end turn button was clicked. So do whatever the frick you want to do about that. That's going to be fine. But I think we are going to need some ability to get an instance of this. So we're going to do public. Instance is a pretty good word for this. Hold on. Public static universe manager instance with a getter over here. If instance is equal to null, if static instance is equal to null, then what we're going to do is game object dot find object of type, because this is a game object that'll exist, so we can find it this way, of universe manager. So we're going to set instance of this. There's a million different ways to do this, like sort of quasi singleton sort of behavior. But that's going to be okay. And then you're going to return instance. Why are you whiny? Oops. Find object of type. There it is. Object of type, because otherwise it would be returning an array. So we're going to have this. So then whenever we've got some code somewhere, we can do something like universe manager dot instance dot Human player. Now, we could check here to make sure it's set, but that's going to be okay. And I guess with the human player, public void intern. That's right. Oh, right. Because this is a reference to the player base class as opposed to the player underscore human. Which has the end turn. Could consider some changes, but there you go. So now we've got that. We could add an end turn to the base player class that does nothing. The thing is, it really doesn't make sense. Like, logically, it makes no sense whatsoever. We could do it because if we did it that way, then conceivably the active player here, the human player, could be a reference to just the base player class. But we'll do this. It's going to be okay. There's going to be a fair number of differences with the human player and things. Maybe. I don't know. We'll go back and forth. Anywho. And yeah, over here, I'm just taking the lazy way of, we need to do this. Do this, and you're going to call UI end turn button, button clicked. There we go. So now when we hit that button, it'll call end turn for the human player, and things will happen. There's still not a whole lot happening because we're not actually processing turns, so that's okay. Now, at no point are we actually creating the players, right? I'm not, okay, I can close this. Under the universe manager, right? We have current player, we have human player. Those aren't being set anywhere, but we also don't have just a list of players. Now, presumably, yeah, the players should also belong to the galaxy. Because again, everything that can be saved is part of the galaxy. That's all the data. I like the idea that the universe manager is keeping track of who the current player is and everything like that. Although I guess when we save the game, we have to remember whose turn it is. So maybe current player should be part of the galaxy. Human player still shouldn't. It's not something we have to keep track of, like, what type of player everyone is, you know, their class and things like that. That's a whole other something for the serialization thing to respond to. This is for UI purposes, so this can exist in the universe manager. But I guess the current player does actually have to belong to the galaxy, doesn't it? Boop. Oh, forgot how, like... Man, I'm still not used to Visual Studio for so many things. Right, and this does have an array of players. That's true. And then some sort of current player. And with this, what we could do something is int current. We could do current player index. Right, which will default to 0 anyway. We got the star systems. We can do something like public player get player int player. Why is that capitalized in star system? Player index. Return players player index. And then public player current player keep mixing up whether I use the get function type of nomenclature or a property. Inconsistency. If there's anything I'm consistent about, it's being inconsistent. So return get player current player index. Like this. And these function calls have basically no overhead. In fact, the smart compiler will go and basically inline these for you. So then in the universe manager, we don't have current player. Instead, what we have is galaxy dot get current player dot do turn over here. Something like this. We might change do turn to just update or something like that. That's a possibility too, just to keep, again, some of the convention a little bit same-ish for whatever that might be worthwhile or worth doing. Okay, so when we generate the galaxy, which is here, we generate the galaxies. We don't generate the players yet, so we generate stars and things like that. So we're going to do something like I guess that's fine, where length is num players, galaxy config dot num players, which again, this galaxy config thing may change. We haven't decided yet. Then what we're going to do is we're going to create a new player. But if I is equal to 0, 0th player is the human. Humans, we're number 0. Then what we do is player P equals new player underscore human. We give it its ID, or this index, because we've decided that everything should be aware of its own index, just for cuz. It'll come in handy in a few different ways. Else P is equal to new player underscore AI with your index, and then in our players array, we'll add in P over here. Good. So you've got that. So when we generate here, we generate the galaxy, and then what we're going to do here is our human player is equal to galaxy dot get player at 0. Is this a safe way to do this? Oh, we have to cast it as well. Right, because all it knows, like, get player returns a player class. We're going to force it into this. I mean, the answer is really no. No is the answer to this question. If you're asking it, you probably know the answer already. And I'm sure we can find a slicker way. I'm not convinced that this, when we generate our players, oh, I'm in the wrong folder. Right over here. I'm not convinced this is the way we want to do it. We probably, well, for now it's fine. Actually, for our default assumption that we're single players is okay. If we go multiplayer, remote, or hot seat, then we need a different way to do this. But for single player, one player, X number of AIs, this is fine. Ditto here. This is fine if we are a strictly single player game. And I mean, assuming, but if we want to randomize the player slot or have many local human players, because that's really what this is, right? Remote human players don't ever get picked as the human player for UI purposes. But if we have many local human players, i.e. hot seat, then we'll need a better way to cycle through them. What we could do for something like this is just when the player is done, right now, so if is equal to true, and again, I like to make it explicit just because reasons, the current player still needs more time, else the current player is done. So then what we can do is something like tell the galaxy, or tell the player, no, galaxy list, something like public void advance current player, or something like this, right? So what we do is we go current player index is equal to current player index plus 1 modulo the number of players, which rather than read the config file at this point, we're actually going to use players dot count. over here. So we advance what the current player is, and we loop around as need be. Although we might want some sort of like special logic, like to advance the turn counter. Yeah, we probably want something like int turn counter. And then we can do something like if current player index is equal to 0, it means we've looped around, so increase the turn counter or something like that. You know, something of this nature is going to be cool. If the current player is done, so here's where we call galaxy.advanceCurrentPlayer. And then we could do something like, if this were a hot seat game, then we could do something like, if the new current player is of type player underscore human, update player human. And there's no reason we couldn't write the code now, except that it really would never do anything for us. But we could do something like that. And it would be as easy as this. All of a sudden, we've got hot seat. Literally, if we do this, we've got hot seat. All we have to do is change which human player the player human variable is pointing at, because the UI is going to keep using this player human variable to do the correct thing for the correct person. Boom, we have hot seat. Easy. Yeah, actually, Broke Stream, I completely agree with you. And again, that's why I had the discussion about like, we've got things with, you know, is subclassing smart or not? This, I think, is still fine. I don't think this is a real problem. I don't think this represents a problem. Either way, we'd have to check, well, what kind of controller is it or something like that? Do we advance, like, is the controller for this player the human controller or not? And in which case we advance the pointer. Because this thing here is just to make sure that the user interface is looking at the right player. And so we'd still need to do something for that. I mean, I guess what we could do instead is the player class itself could be something like, if we did write a begin turn function for each player, then the begin turn function could be responsible for saying something like, hey, am I human? If so, I should tell the universe manager to point to me instead. But I don't like the idea of the player mucking around in the universe manager, so this is fine. Either way, the player, the universe manager is either going to be checking some sort of like Boolean or enum, or is going to be checking to see what kind of controller it is, or is going to be checking type of. It comes out to exactly the same. We're going to have some sort of like if check for confirming if we should switch the AI. And that's really what it is. And specifically is it of type local human player as opposed to remote human player or something of that nature. I'm actually tempted to just write this code. And then we don't even have to do this, like... Which is kind of funny. Like, how hard is this? It's not. But then the question is, if we do have hot seat, what's the first UI we show? Well, we show the UI of the first human player. So it's going to end up being the same. I mean, assuming the human players are made first or whatever. I mean, I guess what we could do is just, after the players are generated, loop through the players until we find the first human player and set the UI to that. And then whenever we advance the current player, make sure the UI is, if it's a human player that's the current player, advance the UI to that player. And that deals with the idea that, I don't imagine why we would do this, but this is sort of a belts and suspender thing. Imagine we're doing hot seat, but the players are interweaved. Like, player, 0 and 1 are AI, then 2 is a human, 3 is an AI, 4 and 5 is a human. Like, I don't know, I guess we might have random order, because if you're playing, imagine a Civ game where you're building wonders, you might want to randomize at the start of the game what player's in what slot. so that, not everyone can guarantee they win all the wonders or whatever, some damn thing like that. Or you might even randomize the player order every turn, which is an option in... I don't know if that was ever in any of the base Civ games, or it was a mod, like the NQ mod, maybe, for Civ 5 or 6 or something like that, which added the option to process player turn orders randomly for the purpose of not making it so whichever was in the first player would win all wonder ties or some damn thing like that. This is sort of navel-gazing to something that doesn't really matter and isn't even that hard to switch around later on. But you know what I'm saying? That's like kind of cool. What's a hot seat game? So a hot seat game that's an excellent question. A hot seat game isn't something you see in a lot of different games. And in particular, you don't see very often anymore, mostly because actual multiplayer is more capable. The idea with hot seat game is that it's multiplayer, and it only really works for like turn-based games, where players take their turn at the computer, taking their turn. It makes a lot of sense if you imagine a board game, right? Let's say we made like Monopoly or something like that. Whatever player that player's turn is, they're in the hot seat. They have the mouse and keyboard is doing stuff for that player, and then when they're done their turn, they get up, and then someone else sits down into the hot seat, and it's now their turn to take their turn. So that's what hot seat is for. And for turn-based games, it's perfectly fine. And it turns out to be really easy to do. Like, it's so stupid that more games don't have hot seat. Especially I guess you have to sort of think about it ahead of time, because the UI, again, we're going to do this great little convenient thing where every time, the UI is updating itself, it's going to make a request to the universe manager to say, okay, what's the end turn button, right? Wherever the hell I put that thing, right here. Is just when you button click, it says, okay, I want the current human player end turn, right? As opposed to remembering, having some reference to whatever the current human player is. No, because this can change. This can change constantly, and it just works. Tell you what, fuck it. Excuse me. Let's implement hot seats right from the start. Easy. So what we're going to do is void update current human player. Like, we keep talking about it. Let's just do it. It's going to take 2 seconds. So update the player used for the UI. That will be the current / nextest player that is human. I'm sure there's a better way to word that. But yeah, so the idea is we're just going to, because if the current player is the computer, what we're going to do is instead we're just going to fast forward and find the next human player who's due to play and show them their UI. That way, while the AI is crunching their turn, the next player can already be thinking about their moves. That's the idea. Because a human player just finished. Since a human player just finished, we don't have to show their screen anymore. They're done. So let's just show the screen of the next human player. Now, if you're a single player game, it's just always going to be the same person. That's going to be fine. I like nextest. I mean, really, next, the current / next player. But I want to emphasize, it's not just the next player. It's the nextest player that is done. That is human. Shut up. It's perfectly cromulent. And so really over here, we're going to cut this out. Remove all this note. Like, I wrote all this time and, like, just to convince myself that, you know what, I should just do it. Update current human player. Boom. Done. And so it's going to be something like this. Now, the one thing is we're going to want to loop through each player, starting with the current. But I don't want... I mean, presumably we're going to want some sort of get players. That's fine. Right? Like, there might be some sort of reason. A very legitimate reason, possibly. That we might want to be able to return an index of all the players. For some reason. one could easily see this. But the thing is, I don't necessarily want to export the current player index and different things like that. Like, to me, it's starting to, like, deal with too many, just, I don't know, too many internals being exposed. So why, maybe the Galaxy function should just have some sort of helper. Get, get current-ish human player. I like it. I like it. Because it's not necessarily get current human player. I mean, I guess it's fine, right? It's return the human player who is due to take their turn the soonest. Either the current player or the nextest one. I still love that. Quill's having too much fun naming things. They say the two hardest things in programming, the three hardest things in programming are naming things and off by one errors. That's the three hardest things in programming. So what we want to do is int I is equal to the current player index. We're going to want some sort of like, I could do a while. I could do, you know what we don't ever do? A do while loop. Huh? A do while loop, hey? Or something like that? I mean, we could do a for loop, but we really, because we're going to need to loop around and think, whatever, man. Fuck it. Man, okay, we're nearing the end of the programming because I'm getting goofier and cursier. If players, I, so I guess we do like type of, there's a couple of different ways to do it, right? How's the best way to check a type? And again, maybe this is a good example of like why components would be better, or we could do some sort of flag, like type of players, and then we can like is class player underscore human, right? No, but you don't know. Type of our namespace. What are you complaining about here? What are you looking for? Oh, do you? Hang on. C# is class. How to use this? I gotta type. Oh! Yeah, I'm using this wrong. This returns if it's a class or not. It's not doing what I want. This is returning if it's a class. I mean, can I just compare this if it's this to this? No. Also, why is this one still underlined? Type or namespace players could not be found. So that's just compilation thing. Hold on. Oh, then we're gonna have to make sure not to loop or something. While I, okay, I ++, and we loop while I is not equal, and we'll have to do a boolean or a mod here, is not equal to the current player index, because we have to be able to exit from this, which is going to be fine. And we'll do the same thing. Plus equals is equal to I plus 1 mod player count. So it'll loop around and eventually end here. And then does this need a semicolon or something weird like that? It does. Where's my chat gone? People have already solved this for me. Oh, right, the is word. That's true. Thank you very much. I was like, no, there's a slicker syntax for this. It's not as annoying as the enum syntax. Like, the enum syntax drives me crazy, where you have to have, like, system.enum and a thing.getValues, blah, blah, blah. It's like, for frack's sake, why don't they have a simpler way of, like, doing some of this stuff? But yes, thank you for reminding me of this. So, return players I. Otherwise, return null, like debug.log error. No human players at all? We don't support this. I mean, maybe we will have some sort of observer mode, but right now it's like, whoa, that's like wonky. If we get here, that means we've looped through the entire thing, assuming I've written this correctly, which probably I haven't, but let's pretend. Right, because this is going to bail whenever I is back equal to current player index, which is our first one over here. Maybe some sort of observer mode, that's not what we've got. So we got some sort of thing like this. And then the idea here is, instead, what we have is Galaxy. Oh, and actually this can now, because we know it's going to be player underscore human. Right, at this point, we're very confident. We know the class, so we can clearly do a little cast here. We know that it's a player human, so we'll return that. It'll be typed correctly. We don't have to do a casting over here, which feels great. Get current human player. There we go. So after we generate the galaxy, we update current human player, and every time we advance the current player over here, we make sure to update the current human player. Now, in a single player game, one human player and a bunch of AIs, this will always return the same person. And, you know, maybe we could have some sort of check where, like, literally if there's just the one, then we don't bother doing this loop. But this is going to be, there's so little cost to this because we're only doing it whenever someone hits end turn. It's fine. So we can look to optimize, but I think that would actually just, like, add some bookkeeping variables and things like that that are likely to just cause more bugs. So assuming we've written this correctly, which we probably haven't because it's me, now all of a sudden, no matter, like, we could have a game that is 20 human players and no AIs. We could have a game that is one human player that's in the middle of the player order for some reason. It doesn't matter. The UI will always mostly do the right thing. We probably will want, you know, ideally, if there is more than one human player, we probably want to have some sort of slick little splash screen to say, oh, it is now the turn for player to sit down. Like, Quill, get your ass up. Essentially, sit down, it's your turn. That sort of thing. We want some sort of screen to say that in a proper hot seat thing, but it should mostly just work. Why do you need to cast in the while loop? You know it's human. Well, but the code doesn't, right? If I try over here, if I just try to return this, it will be annoying because I'm supposed to return player human, and what I'm returning is something that is only player. This line doesn't technically know if player's I, even though here we've checked that it's player human, this return can't just trust that it's safe to cast. But we say, listen, no, it's safe to cast it to this type, it's gonna be okay. If for some reason this line doesn't do the correct thing, and at this point we're trying to cast something that's not player human to player human, we'll get a runtime error, but yeah. Player Fluba is a dirty cheater, though. He's probably looking at other people's screens. That's one thing with hot seat games, is if they're supposed to be hidden information, it becomes a little dicey. Although it works really nicely in tablets. I will say one thing. The one advantage that tablets have over sort of PC gaming is that it's really nice for hot seat because someone can just take it and be like looking at the private stuff, making sure no one's looking over their shoulder, take their turn, and then pass it to someone else. The downside is it's kind of boring if, like, no one else can be looking at the game at the same time, right? Because then it's like, oh, well, Joe's taking his turn, and God, he always takes 5 minutes to think all his shit through. What are the rest of us going to do? I mean, and at this point, there's like 5 players in the game, and then so it's going to be 20 minutes before I get to take another turn. Oh, God, how boring. Right, that's the one little thing there, but anyway. Boop, 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 boop. Hot seat should have password to start a player turn. That's interesting. Classic Joe. Exactly. Damn you, Joe. Salty food or sweet food? Cool Man Fight. Have you considered the combination? Salty and sweet at the same time? Sorry, player is... Player, human player. We'll give it the correct type. Go to polymorphism. Since used is, you can do... Oh, as human. And that's... I mean, as far as I know, this type of cast and this type of cast... Like, I don't know if they technically do exactly the same thing. Like, there might be some sort of internal difference between those. I don't know. As a somewhat older school programmer, I'm just used to doing my cast this way. As will return null if it can't cast it. But this, that is a good difference, because this will give you a runtime error. The program will just explode and be like, no, if it can't cast it, this will just nope right out. It'll throw an exception. And I like that. I don't want it to just return a null. I can see different things could be a null. Like, maybe we want this to just return either the class if the current player is human or null if it's not. But that's not what we want to do over here. So I think this will just explode. As an operator doesn't throw exceptions. So there's reasons you might want to do it, but I'd probably do it explicit. I'd probably keep doing checks to make sure things are correct, and then choose how I want to explode. I really like noisy explosions. If something's supposed to go bad, especially during development, like don't jerk me around. Just like detonate and stop. Don't like return something that like, you know, some other function later on will explode on, and they'll be like, how did this get this value? I don't know. No, just be wrong as loud as possible, as quickly as possible. That's the answer. Anyway, I think what we're going to do, since I'm clearly getting more and more off the rails here, we'll probably bring the programming a little bit more to a conclusion here. What we could do is we could just do a little UI stuff to confirm some of the workings. Where's my actual Unity window? There it is. In our top bar over here, that's this is just dummy text here. Let's go, let me duplicate you. And then have something like, so this is like player ID or something like that. So let's UI player, well, it's player index actually, something like that. And then open this up. So this thing's job is simply on update. So it needs a reference to .ui. Get component text equals player index plus, let's see, universe manager dot instance dot, it's like the human player, yeah, because we're showing the current UI, dot, player index. There we go. Player index. And we could put in an explicit toString or something like that, but in case we want to do some formatting or something weird. It doesn't matter. It'd be implicit anyway. Oh, this dot text. There we go. So what should happen here, I wonder if it would run once with an error if we don't have a human player yet. Ah, we do actually. We have a lot of errors. We'll probably clean some of this up before we move on. Oh! Well, here's something that doesn't help. We never actually instantiated the players array. Actually, we didn't instantiate any of these. Although I'm probably not gonna yet. Because if I try to mess with these right now, I want a very clear, like, dude, you've never done any work with it whatsoever, so let's leave it blank. But now we actually have an instantiated list. Don't necessarily want to do a full debugging session, but let's at least get it to, you know, compile. Oh! Okay. So, oh, here's what I want to do. I want to have 2 of these. Because what I want is what? Player index and like human player index or something like that. Let me duplicate you. Human player index. Excellent. Removing this. Human player index. Yeah, okay. I know that you can't render because you're bad because you've already got a name, but yeah, this one is human player index. So you're taking human player. And over here, you're taking current player, which actually we can't get because we can't also get the galaxy. I just want to debug and show that there's, in fact, a difference between the human player and the current player. Galaxy that get current player. It's part of Galaxy. Do I make it public? Sure. And I suspect that in the end this will be maybe a property or something like that. I mean, there's literally no difference in code whether this is a property with a public get set or just a public field. It makes no difference whatsoever. But let's pretend for now. So the idea is here is we're going to get .galaxy .get current player. .toString. Okay, so compile. Compile is okay. You got that. Oh, so we want current player index versus human player index. I bet you they're going to overwrite each other. Let's put in a little bit more space here. So if we run this, okay, they're both. Oh, right. I forgot that it didn't actually drag on there. There you go. Hit play. So player index is 0 and human player index is 0. If I hit end turn. Oh, yeah, it's burning through all the AIs, but you can see it. Can you guys see it? Hold on. Let me maximize it. It's very quick. I don't know how well it's going to get captured on OBS. But when I hit end turn, the player index number over here doesn't change. It stays at 0. But this one, it's very fast. It might be hard to see. You can see the current player index burns through every other player. It processes all the AIs. But the human index doesn't change. If we did have more than one human in here, and I guess we could do that. Hold on. In our galaxy, if we did a little funky thing like what? If I is equal to 0 or I is equal to 4. There, we're going to have 2 human players. So I'm going to end turn. It's going to run through. It'll immediately change this to 4, assuming we've got it right. It'll run through the AIs on the way and then stop at 4. Boom. There it is. I'm going to hit this again. It's going to immediately change this back to 0 and then run through the AIs until it hits 0. We've implemented hot seat. Take that, every game that doesn't implement hot seat for some damn reason. All right, we're going to do this. Put that back there. Done, done, done. Twitch chat sees everything. So I think we're gonna end this here. I'll push this over to Git. I'm hoping it won't be as long this time for the next one of these videos, including like a non-stream version of these videos. I want to keep working on this, make the turns actually do some stuff. But yeah, I think that was good. Again, we talked about a lot of theory about organizing things. You can sell less game if it has hot seat. Yeah, but if people only have one computer, you're not going to sell more than one copy of the game anyway. And yeah, very few people use hot seat is one of the things. It's very uncommon that people play a hot seat game, so it's not necessarily worth the trouble debugging it. But I think we've just shown that, like, I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of hot seat debugging, if I'm going to be perfectly honest here. The one gotcha is if this were a game with real-time battles that use controllable, right? Like Master of Orion can include battles that you personally control. Then player versus player battle doesn't make sense. I guess in that case, we'd have to have a thing where, like, you'd have to do the auto-resolve. In a hot seat game, if two players are going to have a fight, you're going to have to use the auto-resolve button instead of manually running the battle. Although, I guess Master of Orion 2, so the new Master of Orion has, like, real-time battles that just play out dynamically, right? But Master of Orion 2 was turn-based tactical battles, so you could still do it in a hot seat. Interesting. All right, we're going to wrap up the programming, though. If you were just here for the programming, hey, thank you very much. If you guys are one of the many supporters of the programming channel on Patreon, patreon.com/WillieTeenCreates, thank you very, very much for continuing to make these happen. It is so awesome and super cool. But now we're going to get our dwarf on. And I hope everyone's ready for some Dwarf Fortress. I know I am. Mu 2 is better, we just need a Mu 2-2. Well, Rock Mage, the one thing I will say about the new Master of Orion that I really like, I like how the systems are not single points. The fact that you have to cross a system from like hyperlane point to hyperlane point, and the fact that you can build defensive structures on those, to me is a massive, very, very cool improvement that I really, really, really like a lot. Also, the fact that there are hyperlanes as opposed to the direct point-to-point thing from Mu 2, I think is probably better strategically as well. So I do think those are quite cool, but we'll see. You ready for some salt? Yeah, we're going to mine as much salt as we can. We've actually found candy. I think we might start digging at some of the candy. It's very dangerous, but we'll see. Where is my sound? Good. Oh, I have to make sure I put a cut in the YouTube recording.